Hello and welcome to our webinar on what it's really like when selling a business. I'm Paula Allerton, Marketing Director at Equiteq, based in our London office, and our presenter for today is Marc Jantzen, who sold his consulting firm to Capita. Marc will be presenting for about 20 minutes and then I'll be putting your questions to him. Please post your questions using the control panel on the right-hand side of the screen. The questions box appears towards the bottom. So over to you, Marc.
Thanks very much, Paula. Good afternoon to everybody. So I'm going to cover a little bit about what I've learned through the process and how that's gone, and obviously I'll have a chance to answer questions. But before I do that, I'm just going to share with you my background, essentially. I'm just trying to work out how to move this slide forward. For some reason it's not. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that. So in terms of introduction, my background, I'm a chartered accountant for my sins, trained with Pricewaterhouse, moved on to then join PepsiCo and got some operational experience before joining Blue Sky. And Blue Sky was the business that I sold. Some of you, I recognize some of the names on the list, so some of you know a little bit about Blue Sky, but essentially we were, and still are, a performance improvement consulting and training business, focusing predominantly in sales, customer experience and leadership. The business has won many awards over the years and worked with some major blue chip clients. And to be fair, I think we built up a reasonably impressive track record. But as you know, some of you will appreciate, I'm sure, it was a consulting business which had some intellectual property, but also was based very much on the people and the capabilities. So not an easy business to sell. In terms of my role, I was with Blue Sky for 17 years, and my sister actually started it originally in 1997, and I joined a year later in 1998. And commerciality clearly runs in the family, because at the time she gave me no equity, and I joined as an employee, and on I think it was 40 grand a year or something. And progressively, within a couple of years, I had equity. I took on more senior roles, managed a team as the business grew, and then got voted in by the partners to become managing partner and run the business, and ultimately became CEO and majority shareholder at the point of sale, or was the majority shareholder by the time we reached a transaction. So that's a bit of a potted history in terms of Blue Sky. As you'll see here, I sold to Capita, and the advertised package was £12 million. I'll be straight up, and we didn't quite achieve that. We didn't quite achieve the full earn-out, and it was just shy of 10 million. Still, I've got to be honest, I was thrilled to bits with the outcome. The revenue multiple and EBITDA multiples were certainly within a good range. And I've got to be honest, we got more for the business than I would have expected, and I certainly would pass on my thanks to Equiteq for supporting me through that process. And then I left after completing my 27-month earn-out in June 2015, and been bumming around ever since. No, only joking. I did take a few months off, but I've been back working this year. So yeah, so I'm a year post-sale and post-completion and post-earn-out, if you like. So that's my background. I'm going to just move on to the 4 areas that I've kind of chunked up my learning into, and hopefully you'll find this useful. It's obviously a very personal experience, selling your business that you've been spending many years building and growing. And so, but hopefully some of the learnings that I've taken away will be useful to you. The first area, this is a bit of a philosophy for life for me, which is take a look at the front of the queue. So any key decision that I make, I try and get a good understanding of what is that really going to look like if it really happens. And I would say that is a really important thing to do when you're making such a key decision as selling your business. The second area is straightforward enough. It's around planning ahead. The third area is about retaining a focus on the core business. And then the fourth and final area is around maximizing the earn-out. So moving on to taking a look at the front of the queue. The context here really is, and it sounds a bit dramatic, but you'll have killed the golden goose. So you won't have an income anymore. I know it sounds really straightforward and obvious, but you'll have capital, hopefully a good chunk of capital, but no income. And as we know right now, interest rates are incredibly low. So unless you're prepared to take a risk, then earning money on that capital is really not that easy. You'll also be under restrictive covenants, with respect to hiring your old staff or approaching your old clients. And I was under covenants for 4 years from the point of transaction, which means just under 2 years following the completion of the earn-out. So that obviously is an important contextual point. And you may want to do something different, but that will depend on some of the questions that I've sort of posed to you on the right-hand side here, which I would implore you to explore. What's next? What are you going to do post-sale? Will you take time off? Will you need to work? How much money do you actually need? Have you still got kids to go through university? Do you want to put some money into a pension? These are all important questions to understand. So, by the time you've bought the new car, maybe the new house, maybe even a holiday home or a yacht, how much capital do you end up with? How much can you earn from that? What income deliver to you? And can you live on it? Or are you going to have to start all over again? And you may have a whole bunch of ideas of what you can start again with, and that's what excites you, and that's part of the reason why you're exiting, and that's fantastic. Or in some cases, I know a friend of mine who did incredibly well. Actually, he sold his business, made a lot of money, and directly after sort of the cash was in the bank, he was out buying property. He was getting involved in various schemes of car businesses that he was enthusiastic about, various things, and within 2 to 3 years, he'd lost over £3 million. And not only that, he was more stressed as a result of a number of things, a number of fingers in pies that he had, than he was when he was running his business. So when I saw him a couple of years later, he'd consolidated all of his investments and was then back in the industry that he'd been in where he made his original money. And I guess the reason I tell that story is because actually it's a lot easier to grow what you've got than it is to start something from scratch. And so again, and I guess the final point is speak to as many people as you can that have been through the process before, and get that clear visibility of what it's going to look like at the front of the queue when hopefully you effect a great transaction. Okay, so that's kind of the first point. The second area, which is all about planning. So there's no question that executing a sales process is going to take an awful lot of time and energy and focus from yourself and typically from your finance team. And it can be a bit of an emotional roller coaster. So here are a few things that I'm suggesting that you might do to set yourself up to smooth that process and I guess protect your interests as well, really. Particularly if you haven't been through the process before. I know a number of serial entrepreneurs who've done it several times. They know the deal, they know what's involved, and they know how to approach it. But if you haven't been through it, I guess the first thing I would recommend is that you delegate as many of your core operational responsibilities as possible. And that's for a couple of reasons. A, it frees you up to manage the sales process and everything that goes into that. And B, if you are looking presumably to exit sooner rather than later, then if you're not tied into clients and you're not tied into operational delivery, then it's more likely that you'll get a shorter earn-out when in conversations with the client, because they work out that you are dispensable and you're not fundamentally tied to the success of the business. The second recommendation is really straightforward, but this is about starting early, and making it easy. Don't wait until you're in a sales process before you get all your internal documentation and processes together. You want to be doing that a year or two out ahead of the transaction, so that it's a well-trodden path in your business. Everybody's used to updating the relevant documents. Everything's held in the right place. And I'm talking about little things like getting employment contracts all signed, having signed purchase orders for all of your client work, which is a notoriously difficult thing to get within a consulting business. But the more you can do that ahead of time and build those processes in, the smoother the sales process will be. The third area is around resources, and this will be different depending on where. If you're a little light in certain departments within your business, then those may be the areas that you'll need to beef up. For me, it was within finance, and on reflection, now knowing that I will need to negotiate a working capital figure, or at least in combination with the broker. You need to have someone all over your debts, and unfortunately my financial resources were diverted to supporting the sale, not as focused as collecting debts, and our debtor days went through the roof, and so I had a real challenging negotiation on my hands to make sure that we didn't leave too much cash in the business. The fourth recommendation is quite simply, don't do it on your own. It just doesn't make sense to do it on your own unless you've been there and done it before, and even then I think having someone holding your hand through the process, bouncing off ideas, advising you what information to release, what not to release, and supporting the negotiation is really fundamental to getting the best outcome. And I think, I mean, for me, I did use Equiteq for several years prior to actually affecting the transaction in a mentoring role, and that's a service that not many advisors offer, and it's nice that they actually get consulting businesses. I think that was a key distinction for me. In fact, on that point, I did have a failed transaction back in 2008 where I used a different broker, and I got to be honest, on reflection, they never understood our business. They just didn't get it, and equally I think they were just looking to get a transaction away rather than really considering what was in the best interest of myself and my fellow shareholders at the time. And the final recommendation really is around family. It sounds obvious, but don't book any long holidays at critical, you can forecast when the critical times in the sales process are going to be, and you really need to be around and focused and responsive to give yourself the best chance of maximizing value. So those are a few thoughts about planning ahead and giving yourself the best chance of getting the best outcome. The next area really is around focusing on the core business, and this is really important for a number of reasons. Deals do fall over, and so you want your business to be strong coming out of it if the sale process is not successful. Equally, the acquirer will be looking at your business, and on a monthly, once you're into due diligence, they'll be wanting to know how's business going, are things on track, and if you start to experience a decline in revenue and profit, then that's probably the fastest way to driving a deal south and making things really difficult to get the deal away. So it's I mean, for me, what I did was I protected my senior team from getting involved in the sales process, managed it all myself, but had them absolutely focused on the core business, and that seemed to work quite well. So, but depending on how you're set up and how you're structured, just make sure that you allocate sufficient time, energy, and resource to focusing on that. And with that, you need a clear strategy, because any acquirer is going to expect to see a standalone growth strategy. And again, actually, Equiteq can help you with that if you so wish, so that you can focus on what the key levers are that buyers are looking for, and leverage the insight that they have of the M&A market. So, but equally, from your people's perspective, chances are they don't know anything about the fact that you're exploring a potential transaction, and so you have to keep them on board and engaged in the future. And having a great vision and strategy for growth is clearly one way of doing that. Coming on to your people and some potential cultural challenges, certainly what I would say, there were a few things that cropped up that challenged my values, and I think the first would be the fact that I've always been very transparent with my team and very open in terms of how we're doing and what's going on. And for once in my life, I was in a place where actually that would have been counterproductive to share with the wider team what we were thinking about doing. And it's hard. Unfortunately, I never really got any direct questions or direct challenges, so I wasn't put in a position that I had to lie, because obviously that would be incredibly awkward. But unless everybody's engaged, for example, through some kind of EMI scheme or some kind of shareholder scheme that means they're going to benefit from a transaction, then all it does is create uncertainty, and people will start fearing for their jobs, particularly those that joined the business because of you. People often say to me, look, I joined the business because of you, I stay because of you. So if they're going to start envisioning a future without you, then that's going to create uncertainty. That puts your performance, your business performance, at risk. So that's a kind of certainly one of the challenges that I came across. Equally, I would recommend sitting with your senior team and thinking through the kind of buyer that you would be open to going with, and how you're going to make that decision. Because you may have people that are just say, look, we'll go to the highest bidder, I don't care who we sell to, whereas others will be going, no, it's all about the strategic fit and the synergies that we can create. And then others will say, no, it's about the cultural fit. So I think for those stakeholders that you have that are going to share in the reward and that are critical to the earn-out period, it's really important to understand the criteria you're going to use, and again, your broker can support you in working that through. And I guess that all feeds into the final point, which is just be careful about who you tell, and ensure that you have consistent messaging and tight communication between you as a team, so that you know what's being shared and when it's being shared. In the transaction that I mentioned in 2008 that didn't fail, I did make the mistake of telling my staff and my associates and my clients and starting to transfer contracts before the contract was signed, and then I had to unravel that whole thing and position a new story of the future without the acquirer, after having sold in the story with the acquirer. So that's, I guess, a real example of why I think this is really important. The fourth and sort of final area that I would like to talk about is maximizing the earn-out. And that, there are many components to this. The first, I would say, is, particularly in my case, yes, I got 60% of the money up front, 40% was riding on the earn-out. That's a significant amount of money. And one of the mistakes I made was I took my foot off the gas a little bit. We completed in April, and let's just say I had a nice summer, and wasn't really as focused as I should have been on the earn-out in those first few months. And it doesn't take long, as you'll know, I'm sure, for the catch-up challenge to be quite significant when you've sold a business on let's say a 20% growth trajectory, and you've stagnated for 6 months, and all of a sudden you've got to get that 20% back through even higher growth further down the line. So think of completion as a stepping stone rather than the grand finale would be my recommendation there. The next area that will play a big role in your success during the earn-out is the sale purchase agreement. You negotiate a number of things. I mean, we can't go into them all now, but a couple of examples would be decision-making power. One of the things that dawned on me during the process of the earn-out is, and I did get reminded of it once or twice by Capita, and they'd say to me, Mark, this is not your money anymore, right? And it's not, it's their money. And so who makes the decision on what you spend, how you spend, when you spend, how much you spend? So the SPA can help in defining really clear decision-making power. For example, around cross-charges, Capita did cross-charge finance, charges to me, IT costs, all sorts of different costs but there were limits set in the SPA that protected me around that. So the next area is the classic hockey stick growth forecast. It's a really simple point, but just beware of selling a story of future exponential growth when the chances are the buyer is going to link what they pay for your business to those growth forecasts. So really simple point, but an important one. Another learning I got was I should have spent more time considering the impact of integration and the degree of distraction it would cause and the impact on performance. That was another reason why the first few 6 months after post-transaction that we flatlined instead of continuing to grow. I had health and safety people turning up, compliance people turning up, new processes to engage with, all sorts of stuff. And so you want that factored in as much as possible into the deal structure. Mindset and emotion. What I'm referring to here, two things. The first is I think you really need to believe in the future strategy. the 1 + 1 = 3 scenario, we will be better as a business being part of the acquirer. And for a number of reasons. Number one, it makes it damn sight easier to sell it in to your staff. And number two, makes it damn sight easier to achieve your earnout. And I guess this was another learning I took from sort of my first failed transaction back in 2008. I was actually exiting the business immediately and becoming a consultant to the business, and my business partner at the time was going to become CEO and lead the business going forward. And I never believed in that strategy. And as it happens, it did fall over. But it was a really awkward feeling to be, even though I was leaving, but it was awkward to be presenting to my team to say, look, you're going to be part of something, and in the back of my mind I'm thinking I don't really believe it myself in terms of the future value of it. So that's a really important thing. I think the other one is to ask yourself the question, can you work for someone else? You know, if you've been working for yourself for such a long time, is it realistic that you're going to be effective reporting into someone who may not be as experienced or as effective or as enlightened as you think you are? That's a really important thing, and knowing that can lead, you know, you can take mitigating actions around setting up your business so that you are not indispensable, so that your senior team are seen to be bringing the business in, managing the business and delivering the numbers, and maybe then through the deal structure you can get out sooner rather than later. For me, I didn't have too much of an issue with it actually. I had several bosses over the 27 months and I was quite comfortable with that process. So the last 2 points, the first one is, again, another learning for me, because I think I was a little bit excited by the prospect of getting the upfront sum. I didn't spend as much time doing the scenario analysis on the earnout and what I would actually need to do in terms of growth to be able to achieve the numbers they were talking about, especially in the context of the integration and distraction issues. So that's certainly something I would do better next time. And then the final point, really, I would highly recommend you getting your team involved in terms of sharing in the value that's created through both the transaction but certainly the earnout, because inevitably, especially if you announce, as I did, I announced my departure sort of 6 months prior to the end of the earnout, and immediately you lose your authority to some degree because people are now looking to a new leader, and you need that new leadership to be absolutely on the money and sort of aligned in terms of motivation with you. So giving them a stake in the earnout, I think, is a really good thing to do. That's it. Those are my kind of top tips. I hope it's been helpful. And now I'd like to take any questions.
Thank you so much for Mark, and thank you for that, Mark, and thank you for being so honest and frank. I feel that was very insightful. We have had quite a few questions, so in the time we have remaining, I'm just going to get through as many as I can for you. So firstly, one of our delegates has asked, when do you know that the business is ready to be sold? For instance, is it when there is no growth, or is it when it's hit a saturation level and needs to be sold to grow? How do you know that?
Okay, so I'd say that's a very individual question. A few thoughts on that would be, the number one thing that a buyer is looking for, that they're looking for ultimately, is future growth, future profits. They're buying the future, not the past. And so selling at a time where you have no growth is certainly not ideal. And it will depend on, you know, what are the reasons for no growth, you know, and what are the reasons for selling. I think the best thing to do actually would probably be to get a review done by Equiteq and assess your business, and they can run all sorts of scenario analysis and forecasts for what your business will be worth today versus what it will be worth in future years, and then you can make a judgment as to, you know, what you want to do, when you want to do it, and why.
Thank you, Mark. You mentioned around looking after your team in terms of the earnout. One of our delegates has asked, did you take care of your key employees that were not stakeholders?
That's a good question. So what I did was I kind of had it in a tier, so we didn't have any formal structure in place. So the top sort of 5 or 6 all took a portion of the completion and earn-out funds. And then I essentially gifted either money or experiences to key employees. So for example, one of my team, I arranged for him to go away for a weekend in the Alps driving an Aston Martin, which was a dream for him, and will create a memory forever, and rather than giving a few £1,000s, So yes is the short answer. Absolutely, it was done very much on a discretionary basis, and on a personalised basis to do something that was hugely impactful and memorable and valuable to each individual.
Okay, a quick question from one of our delegates. Why is it that you don't think being a consultant would have worked post-exit?
I'm not saying that, I don't think I said that it wouldn't have worked, so forgive me if that's what came across. What wouldn't have worked in that scenario was, in my mind, was the strategy. There wasn't enough synergy between the buyer and my business. I think there was also quite a bit of risk in me exiting immediately and moving into a consultancy role, but that's that's obviously debatable, and that's my opinion. But no, I think generally speaking, I would say there's no harm in moving into a consulting role, and frankly, if someone's prepared to pay a good price for your business and you're able to move into a consulting role immediately, then I think that gives you a huge amount of flexibility, and I wouldn't see it as a bad thing at all.
Thank you. One of our delegates has asked about the control that you had after the sale over operations, and if you don't have much control over operations, how can you be responsible for earn-out?
Well, yes, that's absolutely right, in the sense that you need to negotiate that up front. So, and a key negotiating lever, if you've got a sizable amount of money that is linked to the earn-out, then when they're trying to restrict your decision-making powers in the SPA or even post-SPA and during the earn-out, they're trying to make things happen that you don't want to happen, then you've got to fight them. And provided you've your broker and your legal team have done a good job on the SPA, then you should be in a position where you should be able to maintain control over operations. Otherwise, you're absolutely right, it becomes a bit of a joke. And so I think, and that didn't really happen. But the thing is with these things, there are always grey areas and things that you potentially don't anticipate. So I would say there is an element of relying on goodwill from the acquirer and being reasonable. And I think one of the things I would say about Capita as a serial acquirer is that integrity, and they do stick to their word, and they are fairly reasonable. One of the challenges with the hierarchy is, there are multiple layers, and so you can be dealing with somebody that you're reporting into that isn't senior enough to go beyond the process, and therefore you may need to escalate things, and I did that very often and fought very hard for certain things, but generally speaking didn't lose anything of any substance.
Another earn-out question for you, Mark. Earn-out's always a popular topic on our webinars. Is there always an earn-out, or only if there is a discrepancy in perceived value between the buyer and the seller?
I would never say that there was always an earn-out. I would say in selling a consulting business, the majority of time there is an earn-out, and that would be to be expected. There are scenarios where an earn-out is not required, particularly if a business is being carved out from an existing business and slotted into another business, and the management team are going with it, but the owners are staying in the existing business. Then in that scenario, you could see there not being an earn-out. So yeah, I would say in the majority of cases, you should expect the average earn-out is 2 to 3 years, and you should factor that into your thinking, I would say.
Okay, one very quick final question. Why did you need an advisor? Why couldn't you do this for yourself?
Well, having failed to achieve it once with an advisor, I certainly wasn't going to try and undertake it a second time without one. I think they play a fundamental and important role, not just through the fact that they're bringing expertise and insight in terms of the M&A market, in terms of valuation, what you can expect or should get for your business, but they also act as a buffer when you're negotiating. You can play good cop, bad cop, and they can advise you on when to release certain information, So for me, it's a no-brainer. For the sake of saving, a few percentage points on the valuation, you're likely to get a much greater return by using a broker, in my view.
Okay, well that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, Mark. If you posed a question which we didn't have time to answer, then we will get back to you after the event. And if you'd like to discuss the webinar on any aspect of your plans to sell, please don't hesitate to contact me at paulaallerton@equiteq.com. If you aren't already a member, then please do join our Equiteq Edge Club. It's a free source of information for consulting firm owners who are looking to realise equity value in their businesses. You'll find expert guidance and unique research. We've got guest articles and lots more, including a monthly newsletter. So thank you to Mark for a very insightful presentation, and thank you to everyone for attending. A recording of this webinar will be available within 24 hours, and we'll make sure that we send you a link. Finally, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us. We'd really love to hear from you. Thank you, everybody.